Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
We are most pleased to bring you a two-part series with one of our great friends, and he is a medical doctor and has written two just marvelous books. And if you'll be with us both today and next week, I think you'll agree with us what a great pleasure and what a great story this is. I welcome to our program Dr. E.R.W. Fox, better known in our circles, Dr. Ted Fox. He's a remarkable man. He received his baccalaureate degree from the University of Illinois and his medical degree from the University of Chicago. And many years ago, we were very fortunate that he moved to North Idaho, and he has practiced medicine did practice for 57 years. We asked him to come today and again next week to particularly deal with his latest book. And we're going to have a lot of questions about this wonderful book, and I want to introduce it to you, our audience. It's called The Joy of Healing. It's again by Dr. E.R.W. Fox. In this book, I counted it myself, and in the chapters there are 110 different stories about his patients and about different things in life and people he's met and his work as a doctor. And that's what our purpose is. But I do want to introduce also his other book that was written and published in 1993 called The Family Doctor, Good Advice for Better Health. And that's also a very fine book, and we might even have a few questions on that. Near the end of our program today and next week, we will tell you where you can get this book, and it'll be up on the screen, so you might have some paper and pencil ready for later in the show. Dr. Fox, I've known you a long time, and you're so wonderful to come and do these two programs with us. Thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure.
And it's always, I'm so pleased to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who also has known Dr. Fox for many years, and we will invite Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in Idaho, to commence today's questioning with Dr. Fox on his book, The Joy of Healing.
Dr. Fox, I had the pleasure of reading your book, and it was wonderful, and there were so many good things in your book. But throughout the book, there's one theme that seems to run, and that is that good mental attitude begets good health. And the title of your book is The Joy of Healing. Can you tell us why you chose that and what you mean by that?
Well, as I said before in our conversation with you, I really didn't appreciate, when you're in the midst of the battle, you don't have a chance to look around very much. But after I retired some years ago, I began to look back at my experiences of the past and thought, I did a lot of surgery, and it was interesting to me in retrospect to remember how after the surgery was over, we would sew things together, and in a week or 10 days, take out the stitches and the skin would stick together. And, in afterthought, I wondered, how does that work? And it was a real joy and a pleasure to watch people get well. Similarly, in delivering babies, it was really something to be able to see women go through this torture, this travail, and then deliver a baby, and within hours be back up and around and ready to go. It's a matter of, the human body is just absolutely wonderful. And the opportunity to watch this healing process has been a very, very real pleasure.
You talk a lot about humor and how important that is to one's process of healing.
Yeah, I think that didn't come to me very quickly because it took some time we young doctors, early on in our educational period, begin to think of ourselves as being rather important and don't really have a sense of humor. And I learned in working with people is that they don't like a doctor who is a sourpuss. They like a doctor who smiles and is able to talk with them. And I think back to my mother, and she would say, now remember, this was when I finished my training at the University of Chicago and got my MD degree, and I was a bit puffed up about my own importance and thought perhaps I could heal all the worries of the world. I do remember she said, "Now don't take yourself too seriously. Take your job seriously, but not yourself." And then she would say, "Remember, my son, tomorrow the sun will rise and the sun will set without your help." And she was very practical, and she had a great sense of humor. I was the son of a minister, a preacher, and of course my dad he had a great sense of humor too, but he wouldn't let people know that until we got to know him better, and then we were able to appreciate that. But Mother was the leveling person in the family, and she had the sense of humor that was wonderful. And I had 4 brothers, so they helped me in learning about a good sense of humor too.
You do have one wonderful story in the book about your brother and about the service, and can you relate that for our viewers?
He was the second brother up above me. I was the last kid on the block, and in fact, my mother was age 42 when she delivered me. You know, nowadays that would be rather. We do a lot of amniocentesis and a lot of ultrasound and so forth, but I apparently turned out fairly well. So, but I didn't have a sense of humor. I was just a kid. And this older brother knew that my dad had a good sense of humor, and as I recall it, there was a father. He was a little long-winded at times, and sometimes the services got to be a little bit long. And we were expected, of course, to go to at least 2 services in a week. And because of this long-windedness, I think my brother Kurt thought he would play a little trick. And one day he said, "Papa, there's a plaque up there at the entry to the church with a lot of names on it." And he recalled too that my dad, in his long-windedness, would sometimes carry over to 3 services. We had an 8 o'clock and a 9:30 and an 11 o'clock. And so he said, "Papa, what does that plaque up there mean, and what are the names on the bronze plaque?" And Father said, "Well, those are the people who in the congregation who died in the service." And Kurt said, "Which service, Papa? The 8 o'clock, the 9:30, or the 11?" So I did learn early on that even with my father being a preacher, he did have a sense of humor too.
Well, I would have to add, Janelle, that Dr. Fox has other stories in here like that are great.
Yes.
I have one question on attitude and humor, and then I want to talk about some of the 110, what I'd call small chapters in the book about different issues. But I recall in the book at one point when you observed your different patients, and those who had a very positive attitude and had humor and were recovering versus patients who were more pessimistic or negative, that the healing period was very different for them, wasn't it?
Yeah. And of course we would, again, I come back to the idea that patients would like to have a doctor who smiles and is happy and ready to crack a joke if possible. And I think I said in the book somewhere that I was able to observe people who either were in pain, or women who were in labor, or even some of my patients who knew they were dying. They could still crack a joke or evince a smile. And that was a good learning experience for me.
Yeah, let me proceed in the first part of the book. For our viewers who have not seen it yet, the first section is called Your Lifestyle and Your Health, and then there are many what I call sub-chapters. And in that, you talk a lot about certain things such as milk and chocolate and caffeine and weight issues and wine, and like the French and they're liking the wine. Would you share it's kind of impossible even in 2 shows to deal with all the great things in your book, but what do some of those things have in common? One of the things I came away with was that a lot has to do with things like weight and your diet or your nutrition. And if you just pull out some of the things, and these were based on your patients, and for example, one of the subtopics is physical fitness helps senior sexuality, or the Great Milk Mustache campaign, or is chocolate all that bad for you? Would you share with our viewers some of those observations that you had from your patients?
Well, I guess at times I like to sort of poke holes in some of the balloons that we in the medical profession send up.
Yeah, I like that about your book.
For example, chocolate isn't that bad. I mean, there are some people that just love chocolate, and I think in the little section where I mentioned that, we found that it might even be that chocolate is good for you. Similarly, I'm concerned about people who, especially women, who worry so much about weight when maybe it's just the way they're supposed to be. And I don't know, caffeine too. I think I try to demonstrate that maybe caffeine isn't that bad in moderate amounts. I think too, again and again, I would run across articles about alcohol. And there was some research work done that indicated that 2 small alcohol drinks a day seemed to keep the doctor away. That maybe that in some way, probably in reducing the cholesterol content or relaxing blood vessels or whatever.
Like wine in particular?
And wine, of course, that's alcohol, you bet. Mm-hmm. In moderation, always, of course.
That was one of the impressions I got from when you talked about chocolate, you talked about peanuts, then you talked about wine, that it seems to be that with your patients, the contrast and what would happen is if they did those things in moderation.
Exactly.
The other thing that I'd like for you to respond to is that you talked about some people would avoid some of these things altogether or completely because they had fat in them, like peanuts. But also at the same time that one zeroing in on that, you were finding from your practice that there's other ingredients that are very good for the system.
Yes. And we know too that some types of fat are good for us.
Yeah.
We go into the unsaturated fats and so forth as far as their impact on cholesterol in our bloodstream. So I guess again and again I was trying to say, hey, maybe that isn't that bad. Maybe we should relax and maybe enjoy. It's a technical subject, but it's a fun thing that I noted that we take things awfully seriously, and maybe I even mentioned that maybe humor and laughter are an aid to longevity. And since I'm 93 and I'm trying to laugh as much as I can on my way through life, I hope that has some bearing on our health as well.
Well, being 80 and 93 now, you're great evidence of the way you've lived, of how that has helped. You also talk about humor for the spirit and the soul, and that all connects together. Uh-huh. Based on your bringing up the fact that you came from a religious family and a father who was a minister, mm-hmm. the whole issue of the spirit, of the human spirit, can have a connection. Or what I'm trying to ask is there a tie between the mind, the spirit, and the body, and the holistic approach to trying to live a good life and a healthy life?
Oh, surely. It's a hard thing to define, and it's a hard thing to measure. But there's been quite a bit of work done now on the fact that humor really does heal. Down at Loma Linda, they even teach their medical students about laughter. And they've done work to indicate that they've done double-blind work and indicate that the people that laugh and the people that have a wise outlook, good outlook on life, are the ones that heal most quickly. We always wanted to come to when we made rounds in the hospital, we want to come to the patient who had a happy outlook on life. It seemed to make a difference.
I can't resist this, Dr. Fox.
Yeah.
You had so many patients, and I haven't told the viewers yet. We'll talk about that maybe next week. But you don't have the exact statistic, but you've delivered like 4,400 or 4,500 babies in that 57 years. But when you talk about the rounds and going in to see a patient who had great humor, please tell about the patient, what the nurse did concerning that wound up I guess I introduced it by saying that the patient was using apple juice. That is a marvelous story to show how a patient can help even a nurse as they're dealing with their own recovery.
Oh yes, that was the one that I learned from Dr. Norman Cousins, who down at the University of California at Los Angeles was an instructor in psychology, and he was afflicted with a peculiar spinal disease, and he was in the hospital, and they were running a lot of tests on him and trying one therapy and another, and things progressed so slowly that he came up with the idea that maybe it would help if I would just maybe check out of the hospital and go to a nearby hotel and get my sons to rig up a projector and watch a lot of Marx Brothers movies and read a lot of funny books and enjoy life and talk with people about humor. And gradually he improved. And he was the one who apparently he had a lot of playfulness. And I think playfulness is one of the things that as we human beings probably lose as we grow older. You know, children, if you ever passed by a playground at playtime, they're laughing, and it's a well-known fact that children laugh about 400 times a day, whereas we adults, we're lucky if we laugh 15 times a day and need more of that. At any rate, Norman Cousins had this playfulness, and he was still in the hospital, and in the morning a student nurse came in and brought in a urinal, a glass container, and said, "Good morning, doctor. Here's the bottle for your morning specimen." And then she turned around and left, and she said, "You know, I'll be back in shortly when you're ready for me." Well, anyway, when she left, Dr. Cousins remembered that last evening his wife had come in and she had left him a little can of apple juice and left it on the side table. And with a twinkle in his eye, he popped it open and poured the apple juice into the urinal, and then waited for the nurse to come back. And when she did, she lifted the container and looked at it through the light, and she said, "Doctor, you know, your specimen looks a little bit cloudy this morning." And he took it and held it up to the light as well and said, "You know, nurse, you're absolutely right. Perhaps I should put it through again," which he did, and he drank it. And the little nurse screamed and ran from the room and went out to report to her charge nurse and tell her what that crazy doctor in room 212 had done. And when she came back in, he admitted what he had done, and they all had a good belly laugh, and he was without pain for the rest of the morning. So that has the moral to it. The story is, of course, pain can be relieved by laughter.
I'm going to go back to Janelle. She has to answer quick, but just one more footnote to support you in that. One, he didn't have that pain, but they're finding in senior citizen homes and so forth that sometimes that individuals become much more cheerful and more energetic when they bring in like dogs for them to have as companions. Something that gives them more cheerful hope about what's happening. Janelle Burke.
We're in that time of the year when there's less light, and I know you have a chapter in your book that talks about the effect that light has on our bodies and on our feelings and how we react. Can you explain that to the viewers?
Well, we do know that at this time of the year, there are more of the blues and the blahs, where we get down in the dumps more easily. Whereas when the sun comes out, as it did this afternoon here, everything is wonderful again. I'm sure that it must have something to do with the brain chemicals that we all have, but probably don't know that we have, but the endorphins and the serotonins, which are the brain chemicals that seem to control our happiness. Serotonin, for example, is the happiness hormone that's secreted by the brain. So that's the type of thing that apparently, you know, now they have found out that having good light and brightness in workshops and workplaces definitely improve the not only the atmosphere, but the productiveness of their workers. Just why, other than that, it works, I'm not sure, but we do have lights now that are specially designed to brighten the world at the winter months, in the winter months, so that there's a little more happiness, a little more better production of work.
What can people do about it? What can people do about it? Light, you said, is one thing.
Yeah.
Do pills help? Do pills and potions help?
Well, of course, we have Prozac and the rest of the things, the so-called anti-depression pills, which are wonderful, and they apparently do work. But they alone, we shouldn't probably depend upon pills alone to relieve our blues and blahs. Actually, at home, I have a special light that sits over my place of reading, especially this time of the year, and it certainly does help to have brightness in one's life.
What about exercise? Is that one of the things, too, that tends to pick up our spirits?
It surely does. And not only that, it seems to be good for us all to do that, and not only from the standpoint of our emotions, but also of our physical fitness. And sexual activities are enhanced, apparently, by exercise, and it's now quite well known that exercise for any of us, at least 3 times a week, it doesn't have to be terribly exhausting exercise, but just good exercise helps the heart. What it does, I'm sure it has something to do with circulation.
But it's also a help with other diseases, diabetes perhaps.
Yes.
You mentioned heart disease. There are probably other things. It certainly helps with weight if people are trying to control that.
Yeah.
So exercise, and you sort of point out that your mom used to say you needed to exercise even when you were a child.
Yeah, get out there and play instead of staying in the house. And I think, and since I'm interested particularly in women, because many of my patients were women for the 60 years that I practiced, I know that a menopausal woman is much happier when she can get out and play a game of golf or tennis or whatever. And younger women too, they would tell me that if they can exercise while they're having their menstrual periods, their cramping is very much less. It's just a practical thing that's true. And of course, exercise is like internal jogging, and laughter is like internal jogging, and it does help with the production of endorphins and serotonins, and it is definitely helpful, you bet.
I hear you saying in the book and in your conversation with us that you have so much that you can do yourself that has a lot to do with your health. When you talk about your lifestyle and your health, humor, attitude, some of the certain things you eat, and being with other people, and all of that. Would you share a little bit with our audience about taking charge of their own body and their own health?
That's a big question, and it certainly is a good one. Certainly one has to talk about themselves, and certainly any time that I can get outside and exercise, especially work in the garden and be active in that way, helps with my spirit and my feeling of being on top of things. That again is very hard to measure, and it's so important to be able to be active. What else could I say in that regard, Tony? It's just a wonderful thing to be able to have activity. In dealing with elderly people, I know that if we could get them up and not let them get into lie down and be immobile, if we can get them to do something that's productive, their health is definitely enhanced by that.
And their life expectancy can grow.
Yes, indeed.
Isn't it dangerous to sit down each day and be depressed, and after one retires and saying, in other words, they need a purpose for each day
Yes.
in their lives.
And that probably has something to do why I took to writing more after I had sort of gotten toward the end of my practice. And I found that writing was an activity that spurred the brain cells to keep going and not letting me sort of slow down and keep going. And that was one of the purposes, I'm sure now in retrospect, that caused me to write. Because writing, if you write, you have to learn. Because you've got to write something, you better know what you're writing about. So I got a second kick out of doing that, and writing is very important.
Let me say about your writing, it's like knowing you and talking with you. As Janelle said before we started the program, you write with such common sense. You write in a language that anyone who reads the book can stay in touch with what you're saying. That's in addition to being a healing physician and very successful, you're also very, very great with words. And that's why I highly recommend the book to those who want to be inspired with that. In relation to that, and we're just about out of time on this program, we'll continue next week, but also in the book, would you not be suggesting to parents they should be very careful with their children that they don't become couch potatoes, that they exercise and have other interests, that become a habit throughout their life?
Well, I think exercise is one thing that our young people of today may have the opportunity not to exercise as much as they did before. But certainly exercise is an extremely important thing.
We're right now out of time, and I promised our viewers as we go off the air, we'll show you where you can get this book, if they'll bring that up on the screen, and we'll be back next week and we'll talk more about this wonderful book called The Joy of Healing by Dr. Fox. If they'll put up on the screen, you can get this book from Rotary at Post Office Box 444 in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho at 83816, or you can go up on the website at www.cdarotaryclub.org, or you can also get it by calling for this book, and that credit card order is 208-762-5636. It's a wonderful book, and it costs $18.95 if you have to have the mailing to you and so forth. I hope you'll be with us again next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
We are most pleased to welcome you back to part 2 of our interview with Dr. E.R.W. Fox, a medical doctor who lives in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. We invited him on the program last week and again this week to talk about his wonderful new book called The Joy of Healing that I have a copy of here. Dr. Fox finished this book, and it was published in this year, 2001, and it's just got marvelous stories in it. Our guest has great medical history. He holds a baccalaureate degree from the University of Illinois and his medical degrees from the University of Chicago, and he practiced medicine for 60 years. And we're so fortunate that he came to Idaho to practice. He has been a general family practitioner, has given of his time in so many generous ways, and he has presided over the birth of almost 4,500 children, in addition to his other areas of practice. Before we get further into the program, and Dr. Fox, welcome to the program. It's great having you back this week.
Thank you.
I want to tell our viewers that I was so rushed at the end of the last program where you can get this wonderful book, and when I fail to do that, people call and say, I don't know where to get it. There are 3 sources that if you're out of our state or our city that you could contact, and one of those is on the website, and I'll ask them to put that on the screen, which they've just done. And that particular one is, as we said, www.cdarotaryclub.org. And CDA Rotary Club's all one word. Or you can write to the Coeur d'Alene Rotary, which is Post Office Box 444 in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho at 83816. Our credit card calls can come in to 208-762-5636. It's also in our town and at Hastings Bookstore for those in this locality. Again, welcome back. I want to tell our viewers, Dr. Fox, that in the main chapters you have a lot of subheadings, and I've counted 110 of those, talking about all kinds of issues that confront patients that you've served over the years. And we welcome Janelle Burke back, who is our regular panelist and attorney in Idaho. And Janelle, we'll ask you to pick up where we left off last week with our wonderful guest.
Dr. Fox, you told us last week you're 93 years old, and you've had a long and successful practice of medicine. Can you tell us some of the ways that things have changed in those years? When you came to Coeur d'Alene, how many physicians were there, and what were the practice conditions like?
Well, yes, we came my wife and I came in 1939. We were just out of our last surgical residency, and we came to a little town that we'd never been out west before. And my wife said, we lived in Chicago at that time, she said, hey, let's get out of this big town. So we headed west to a little town by the very romantic name of Coeur d'Alene or something of that sort. And we got here, to my dismay, I joined up with Dr. O.M. Husted in this group, and we were to have hospital setting at a small hospital, which was a home that had been converted into a little hospital. And there were 9 doctors here at that time. I was the 10th, and they all practiced general medicine. We did everything in those days, including setting fractures and taking care of burns and taking care of ingrown toenails and appendicitis and so on. It was an exciting time because we at that time had to depend on our own abilities, our hands, our stethoscope, and our hands and fingers to know what was going to be the diagnosis and what the treatment would be. And it's been amazing since I've lived through this entire 20th century to see the tremendous change that has taken place in regard not only to how we practice, which is another story, but the medications we've had, the antibiotics that we have now, which didn't happen until early in this last century. The first real antibiotics we had were penicillin and sulfa. And since that time, of course, we've had many, many new antibiotics and many new blood pressure medications, whereas in the early days, all we had was morphine and strychnine and a few of the other simple medications that we had to use. It's been a remarkable time. Probably the most exciting part of it was the fact that we have so many different technological devices now, not only for making diagnoses, but in helping with surgery and helping with obstetrics and gynecology. We now can look in mama's womb with an ultrasound and look at the baby and see it move, and also make a diagnosis as to whether the baby is perfect, whether it's a boy or a girl, so that we know whether to buy blue or pink booties. But anyway, it's a remarkable thing. Then, of course, that was one of the early things. The earliest thing, of course, was in the beginning of the last century when Röntgen discovered that he could look through the bones of his hand by the bismuth substance that he was using in his laboratory. And from that came X-rays, of course. And thereupon we have now all sorts of wonderful things. We have not only ultrasound, but we have MRIs, and we now even have means of positron emission tomography, which is called PETs, which allows neuropsychiatrists and neuroscientists to watch our brain at work by injecting sugar solution into our circulation and seeing the brain functioning. It's just amazing what has happened. Some of it's good. Some of the technology is probably worrisome to some. We now are able to count our genes through the human genome, and we have ways of even making new skin. I mentioned an article in there where my former good friend, Dr. Hamilton Greenwood, would laughingly do circumcisions on babies and then use the foreskin to go fishing as bait. But now that foreskin can be used as a means of producing new skin, sheets of new skin as a stem cell, and to make skin for use on burn cases, for example. Great things are happening. This stem cell in itself, umbilical cord blood has been found to be usable as a stem cell in treatment of certain types of breast cancer and blood diseases. It's remarkable, truly. I've rambled on a little bit.
No, that's wonderful.
Okay.
In your book, The Joy of Healing, that we introduced at the beginning of this program last week, another thing you talked about, and it's along the line of what you're just discussing now, one of the persons you talk about is Christopher Reeves and his accident, and how he's rallied people that have this kind of challenges from accidents. On the way down here in the car, we talked about some programs I did with a microsurgeon, and
yes.
I would like you to share with the viewers what he said. He said, what we've learned through this technology, both of medications and MRIs and other things, that we have spare parts around our body that can be moved around, as he does so remarkable in his surgery. Would you share a little more with us about, that's different from when you started your first practice, and so I know you can give hope to those that may have faced the major accidents, or unfortunately there'll be others in the future.
Yeah, Christopher Reeves is trying hard in his attempted convalescence with rehabilitation to find ways of growing new nerve cells, nerves that could be used in implanting into his spine, in his neck spine, hopefully to be able to gradually return to a normal life. We even, with the ability to create new cells, new tissues, it's possible that eventually we may be able to do that rather than using organs donated from human beings. Great things are in the future.
It is. The medical field just keeps advancing, and
I know.
We don't even know what all the future holds. Do you think from all of this advance, of course, we now are knowing that people are living longer, and I believe I saw the other day that there's like 47,000 Americans over 100 years old, which is, it's comforting to know that one can live longer with good health.
Yeah.
Do you see from all this technology that the lifespan is going to get longer and longer?
At the turn of the last century, life expectancy for a woman was 50 years. She didn't even get to enjoy menopause. Now, a baby born in this year will be able to look forward to living 100 years. Mm-hmm. Now life expectancy is advanced, and now women and men can expect to live into the 70s and the 80s and even into the 90s. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with not only with medications and good health care, but with changes in our lifestyle, and with immunizations, and with medications, of course, and vitamins and proper food and proper hygiene too.
And you talked a lot in your book about hygiene.
Yeah.
Would you elaborate upon that a little bit? And in one area you were talking about hygiene for the mouth, and it's even more pleasant being around people if you have certain hygiene, but that also affects the actual health and the possibility of bacteria and all of those things.
Surely does, yeah. Well, of course, when you look back at hygiene in our communities in the earlier years, when we didn't have inside plumbing and all these other modern wonderful things, naturally the incidence of typhoid and malaria and things of that sort was much greater. So we can thank that, and we can thank our government for being helpful in that regard too. I can't help but think that our own personal care, that we take care of ourselves with cleanliness and with even a simple thing as brushing our teeth. And then we now are being frightened by this anthrax scare, and there is a vaccine for anthrax prevention, but of course we didn't get around to doing that. And that takes 5 injections, but eventually I think we will. Fortunately, too, anthrax of the common kind is treatable with ciprofloxacin and doxycycline, and even with penicillin. So there's hope in that regard. Naturally, we're a little bit more scared at the present time because of the terrorist aspect of how it all came about.
And getting in the air and breathing into the system.
True, yeah.
Janelle Burke.
Dr. Fox, in your book, you talk a little bit about the uniqueness of us as human beings, that we're two-legged creatures, and but that puts a lot of stress on our spine. Can you explain that for our viewers, please?
Well, as I mentioned too, the way we were as our ancestors, we were on our 4 legs, or at least our 2 hands and 2 lower extremities, and that distributed the weight that our body has to carry over 4 areas instead of 2. And then as we rose to an upright position for whatever reason, whether it was to be able to see where our enemy was approaching, or whether it was that we could reach up to get fruit from the tree, we don't know. But at any rate, that is what we have now, a stack of bones, which is the vertebral column. And that has to bear all the weight of our heads are pretty heavy too, heavier at times than others, but anyway, that puts weight and the grinding on the cartilaginous, the gristle that's between the bones and on the discs between our spine bones, and that gradually wears down, and then we are more likely to have backache. And as a 90-year-old who has a little of that myself, I can assure you that it has to do with the upright position. So in that regard, a lot of the surgeries that have been done and a lot of the rehabilitation has been directed toward spinal injuries, backaches. And I could certainly say that there's a lot of things to be done, and then some of the new medications we have now are helpful, especially these so-called NSAIDs, those that do not have cortisone in them. And I mentioned that in the book too. Cortisone is a great drug, but it has this very definite disadvantages, especially in long-term use. So these NSAIDs, which of course are like Motrin and all the other NSAIDs, non-steroidal medications. The most recent one is Celebrex, and they're all good, and they do help. However, preventive treatment, of course, would be the way to go. Being careful of using our legs instead of our back when lifting heavy objects, and care with overstretching, overstraining, that type of thing.
You also, in your book, address drugs and the many different kinds of addictions that we as human beings sometimes get into. Can you explain a little bit what you think about the use of tobacco as a drug and what some of the ill effects of tobacco use are?
Yes, and that comes very close to my own home because unfortunately my wife in early days as a young nurse, everybody had smoked cigarettes. It was the in thing at that time. Unfortunately, nicotine is horribly addicting, and so very often it's almost impossible for some people to give it up. And the damage done is not only to the lungs with the possible production of what's called emphysema, or also to the blood vessels because it speeds up the hardening of the arteries, as we all know. So it's a tough thing. In regard to, I mentioned in the book about morphine, and morphine is not such a bad drug, and it's now coming into more use under prescriptions for the care of people who are terminally ill with severe pain and suffering. Aspirin was, of course, the first drug, and it's been used for many, many years, thousands of years probably. But now we know that aspirin also does other things that are good. One thing is that aspirin in proper doses can help prevent heart attacks. And the other side of it is aspirin in smaller regular doses can increase the blood clotting and decrease the blood clotting so that it's less likely to be causing a heart attack if it's properly used.
In your book, you talk about not only living, but you talk about dying, and you talk about dying with dignity. Would you please share with our viewers?
Yeah, and that is a subject that is, as a member of the ethics committee at Kootenai Medical Center for 7 or 8 years, I learned about how hard some patients, hard time they have in dying. And that opened my eyes to what we might be able to do to make the last days of life easier, dying more kind and more gentle. And we do have now living wills, which allow a person to make the decision while he or she is still perfectly well that, no, I don't want to be put onto any artificial life support systems if it is well determined that I am about ready to die. That has helped. As I said before, we also have good medications, and we have hospice now, which does a tremendous job in caring for the dying individual in their last 6 months of life. And they have trained nurses and trained doctors and trained volunteers who know what to do in the way of administering medication.
I just have to interject here that you and I served together on the board of hospice. You did.
Yes.
When hospice was being introduced to our area, you were really the leading physician to introduce that. And I remember in those days that doctors and nurses had to be introduced to it, and they would some people would call it hospice, and even being introduced. And so I wanted to give you that recognition. It was a great contribution you made.
It was a great thing that we learned from the English, where it was being used more widely. Mm-hmm. And I think we all know that in the state of Oregon, physician-assisted suicide is legal, but it hasn't been used very much, which is a good news because it hasn't been necessary. We almost got it through in Washington and California, but so far that hasn't happened.
There's another chapter in your book called Man, Woman Stuff. I like that title. And below it, the subheading is Apart Yet Together. And in that, I'd like to have you to share a little bit. You did an excellent job of talking about how women and men obviously are different physically. Mm-hmm. And you were very complimentary, rightly so, of women, in saying women have a much more complex, complicated system, and that would you explain to the difference in that women have to go through lots of things that men don't, and hopefully women have had a lot of challenges, but men should be very sympathetic about some of the issues medically.
You know, I like men and women equally, and in fact, I have, in my long years of practice, fallen in love with the human race. But because I've delivered quite a few babies, naturally I was more or less in very close contact and an understanding contact with women. And I must admit that I have the deepest respect for womanhood. They're terrific. Anyway, fundamentally there is a difference between men and women as far as their brain development is concerned. It's now well known that women have the ability to use the sensibility of the left brain and the tenderness of the right brain, and that they have an interesting means of communication between the left and right hemisphere through the corpus callosum. And that gives them a certain ability. I guess you can call it female intuition or female superintelligence that men don't have. And I think we are quite free to admit that. Incidentally, there's been some interesting work done recently on intersex patients and trying to change boys to girls or girls to guys in early life, in infancy really. And that simply hasn't worked. And it has been found that there is a nucleus in the hypothalamus, in the base of the brain, which determines, even long before birth, that this person will be either a man or a woman, because the interchange, trying to make a woman into a man and vice versa, simply has not worked. They have produced a miserable individual in later life. I got off the subject, but that's, to me, a very, the brain and the central nervous system are fascinating. And I hope that I was able in some ways to make this sort of understandable to a person.
Sure.
And I've had persons tell me that, hey doc, you make things sound as if you're talking to me, and that it's quite simple.
That's a gift of your writing.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting to get feedback from people about your book. And one nice elder lady came to me and said, you know, your book has been a great help to me. I've had trouble with insomnia, but I have your book now, and I have it on the bedside table. And when I go to bed at night, I take it out and I read a couple of the little episodes, and then I drop off right to sleep. Cured my insomnia. Now, I don't know if that was meant to be a compliment or not.
I would say it would be a compliment that she would relax and enjoy it, and it would
maybe that
put her in a
was
relaxed state.
I'd like to think that, sure.
Janelle Burke, we have just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Well, continue on your talking about women and their special needs and their special issues.
Well, I guess it takes us right back to the point of how men and women carry on through life, and especially during pregnancy. It, of course, was interesting always to me to see how husbands would hold up under the stress and strain of being in the delivery room. You know, originally men weren't allowed in the delivery room. It was a sterile place, so no one was there but the doctor and the patient and the nurse. But now, of course, the doctor has to go through Lamaze and all the rest of that, and then has to be in the delivery room. A lot of men take it well, and other men will drop and faint. Women, on the other hand, have a capacity for bearing up under the struggle and the travail of having a baby. But it's a wonderful experience. And there's nothing quite like holding a baby in your arms and the doctor putting the baby on mom's abdomen after delivery, and seeing the wonderful thing that happens. And the husband and the wife come together in happiness. She may be calling him names beforehand, but now it's all okay. The last chapter in the book, I do talk about when does life begin, and I think that sort of explains my feeling about the wonders. You know, somebody has said sort of facetiously that life begins when the last kid goes off to college and the dog dies. But it's more than that. Anyway.
I wish we could continue. Dr. Fox, the clock is caught up. We're going to have to end our program, but what a wonderful 2 weeks with you, and congratulations on your latest book, The Joy of Healing. And earlier in 1993, you had written a book called Family Doctor, Good Advice for Better Health. We've put up on the screen where you can contact those that have your book on The Joy of Healing. And we, again, congratulate you. And you were so great to take this much time with us, and I know our viewers have celebrated with us what you've done. And congratulations on being able to communicate so clearly with all of us, including your patients. After 60 years, it's obvious that you know what you're doing.
Well, I hope so.
And again, thank you for being such a good friend also.
It's been my pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, our guest has been Dr. E.R.W. Fox, and talking about his book, The Joy of Healing. We've enjoyed bringing this program to you over the past 2 weeks, and next week we'll turn to yet another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
You guys are home.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.